Hi everyone, my name's Kea Rutherford. I'm a recent graduate from UC Berkeley. I did my honors thesis on the topic of using phytolith analysis to reconstruct prehistoric fire regimes. We also have a recent publication on this work in the International Journal of Wildland Fire. In the past few years, California has experienced record-breaking wildfires. Warmer springs, earlier snowmelt, and longer dry seasons have all been correlated with longer, more severe fire seasons. These trends of increasing wildfire season length and severity are particularly concerning in the context of the wildland-urban interface, or WUI. In addition to these general trends, throughout the last century, northern coastal scrub has encroached into open grasslands, further increasing fire hazard in coastal WUIs. Change from grassland to shrubland increases surface fuel loads by approximately tenfold. The photos on the slide were taken in the East Bay Regional Parks and clearly show this shrub encroachment over time. Managers of land within the coastal WUI must balance multiple, sometimes conflicting management objectives, such as conservation, recreation, and fire mitigation. Understanding prehistoric ecological conditions can help managers set and prioritize these objectives, improving management decisions. Now, to provide some context, I'll briefly walk us through the likely broad effects of grazing and fire on prehistoric vegetation in central coastal California. Pleistocene megafauna, through grazing, browsing, and trampling, may have played an important role in the persistence of grasslands. As native grasses co-evolved with this mostly now extinct megafauna, there are likely echoes of these interactions that continue to affect the ecological requirements of current grasslands. In the late Pleistocene, human pressure and a drier climate resulted in the extinction of many megafaunal species, leading to a decrease in the role of herbivory on the landscape. Because coastal California experiences few lightning-ignited wildfires, the natural fire regime was likely not enough of a disruptive force to carve out and maintain large grasslands. The coastal landscape may have been woodland and shrub dominated. From the mid-Holocene through the 18th century, Native American populations expanded, and their use of fire as a landscape level management tool became an increasingly significant source of disturbance in coastal California. Their frequent burning may have resulted in large-scale type conversion, favoring open grasslands. The present study focuses on this time period, hence the question mark. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Spanish colonization resulted in the decline of native populations and their landscape level management activities. The Spanish continued to utilize fire to increase forage for their livestock, maintaining large open grasslands. However, grassland species composition changed dramatically after European colonization, as invasive Mediterranean annuals replaced native bunch grasses and forbs. Although the broad speculation regarding prehistoric grazing and fire regimes outlined here provides a general ecological framework, land managers require much finer scale information to make informed decisions. Unfortunately, reconstructing past vegetation and disturbance regimes at the site scale in California's grasslands, oak savannas, and shrublands can be challenging because tree ring data, lake sediment evidence, and ethnographic information are sparse. Phytolith analysis is a promising alternative paleoecological tool that has been successfully used to estimate prehistoric grass cover. Phytoliths are microscopic particles of silica formed in plants and deposited in the soil after the plant dies. The grass family produces particularly large amounts of phytoliths. Although other woody and herbaceous plants produce phytoliths, most non-grass species in California produce few phytoliths. This study uses phytolith analysis to improve understanding of the prehistoric grassland distribution and fire regime in central coastal California, as well as to highlight the utility of applying phytolith analysis to reconstruct prehistoric fire regimes in vegetation cover types that lack more traditional forms of paleoecological evidence. This study was conducted in Tilden Regional Park, and 10 sites were selected throughout the park. The selected site locations clearly showed shrub invasion into neighboring grasslands during the period from 1939 through to the present. At each site, a 50-meter transect was run along the grass shrub ecotone. You can see a visual of this setup here on the slide. Soil samples were taken at the 0, 25, and 50-meter marks. At 3 sites, soil samples were also taken under tree cover. All samples were taken at 2-centimeter depth in mineral soil. Because of extensive bioturbation caused by small mammals, there's no possibility for chronological control with soil depth. The soil phytolith content in most regions of California can only provide a record of long-term grass cover at a site. The 2-centimeter depth has been shown to adequately represent the phytolith content throughout the bioturbed upper half-meter of soil. Back in the lab, carbonates, organic matter, and clay particles were removed from the soil samples. The phytoliths were then extracted using a heavy liquid flotation. Once the phytoliths were isolated, ocular counts were made under the microscope. Phytoliths were categorized as elongates, appendages, or short cells, which include rondelles, bilobates, and conates. You can see examples of these phytolith morphotypes on the slide. Now for some results. You can follow along with the thresholds I'll mention at the bottom of the slide. A percent soil phytolith content greater than or equal to 0.3% indicates substantial long-term grass cover. This 0.3% threshold was reached by 30 of the 33 samples. All total short cell counts were above 200,000 per gram of soil, further supporting the interpretation of long-term grass-dominated vegetation. Short cells are specialized phytolith morphotypes that are only found in grasses. Similarly, the high short cell to elongate ratio approaching 0.8, observed at most sites, also indicates substantial long-term grass cover. Stipa pulchra, or purple needlegrass, and Anthonia californica, California oatgrass, are 2 common species of native perennial bunch grasses in the region. They produce distinctive bilobate or dumbbell-shaped phytoliths. You can see an example of the bilobate morphotype on the slide. A bilobate to total phytolith ratio of greater than or equal to 0.1 has been suggested to indicate dominance by one or both of these grasses. This threshold was reached for 16 of the 33 samples. A concentration of greater than 20,000 bilobates per gram of soil is another metric used for determining substantial cover of these 2 native perennial bunch grasses, a level reached at all but 4 of the samples. These results indicate extensive and in some cases dominant prehistoric cover of Stipa pulchra and or Anthonia californica in the sampled region. Additionally, a fixed effects regression was run to test for differences in percent soil phytolith content between vegetation cover types. So that's the shrub, edge, grass, and tree. Based on the results of the regression, there do not appear to be any consistent patterns of phytolith presence related to the current vegetation type. So what do these results mean for the prehistoric fire regime? The phytolith evidence strongly indicates the vegetation in Tilden Regional Park was long-term grass dominated. Although long-term cannot be precisely defined through soil phytolith analysis, equilibrium calculations from previous studies suggest the soil phytolith signal represents the vegetation dominating a site for at least the past several hundred years and most likely over 1,000 years. Grasslands in the East Bay Hills have been shown to be disturbance dependent. Therefore, we can infer that there must have been a frequent disturbance regime in the region, and fire was the most likely disturbance factor. Based on general ecological knowledge about northern coastal scrub, we know that to prevent woody encroachment and sustain large open grasslands, the prehistoric fire return interval must have been on the order of 5 years or less. Because lightning-ignited wildfires are very rare in the East Bay Hills, the phytolith evidence supports the hypothesis that indigenous peoples were actively and frequently burning the hills. But what implications does this information have on management decisions in the region? The California State Park System has used the period between the medieval warm period, a 300-year period starting in 950, and the Little Ice Age, a 300-year period starting in 1550, as a reference point for ecological restoration, a period that fits into the mid-Holocene through 18th century timeframe discussed in the present study. As phytolith evidence indicates, the East Bay Hills were likely dominated by disturbance-dependent grasslands during this commonly used reference period. Maintaining the large areas of shrublands currently seen in the region does not align with the management objectives of conservation and restoration. Furthermore, fire hazard increases dramatically as shrublands encroach on grasslands. Shrub removal should achieve both conservation and fire mitigation goals in the East Bay Regional Parks and likely throughout much of the central coastal region of California. A hands-off management approach is not appropriate for this landscape type. Using prescribed burning to reintroduce the frequent fire regime would be the ideal approach to reestablishing and maintaining grasslands in the region. Unfortunately, this approach is very challenging on a large scale today in coastal California's WUI because of liability concerns regarding prescribed burns escaping into densely populated areas, as well as strict air quality regulations. Prescribed livestock grazing, a disturbance factor with some effects similar to prescribed fire, could effectively help control shrub encroachment and maintain grasslands while mimicking the postulated grazing by Pleistocene megafauna. Although the East Bay Regional Park District has used grazing as a management tool for over 50 years, and currently 65% of the district is grazed annually by cattle, sheep, or goats, shrubland cover has increased while grassland cover has declined, suggesting that the current level of grazing pressure is not enough to prevent woody encroachment. The photo on this slide was taken in the East Bay Regional Parks and provides an example of, in this case, the effect of goat grazing on coyote brush encroachment. It is important to note that our findings contradict an earlier phytolith study conducted in the East Bay Hills that did not detect long-term grass cover or high abundance of native perennial bunch grasses. There may be several reasons for these discrepancies. The phytolith extraction methodology used in the present study and the metrics used to measure soil phytolith content were much more efficient and sophisticated. The locations of the study sites may also help explain the discrepancy. The sites sampled by Hopkinson and Huntsinger were south of Tilden Regional Park. The present study demonstrates the utility of using phytolith analysis to infer prehistoric fire regimes, particularly when direct forms of evidence are unavailable. By combining historic ethnographic information with ecological knowledge and paleoecological techniques, we determined that the East Bay Hills were likely prehistorically dominated by disturbance-dependent grasslands that were maintained by the frequent fire regime with a return interval of less than 5 years, practiced by the Native American population. We believe that soil phytolith analysis can be successfully applied in many other regions of California and throughout the world to provide insight into the long-term vegetation on landscapes that have been recently altered by changes in fire regimes or management practices. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Here's the information for our publication if you have any further interest. And lastly, I'd like to thank all the people who helped and guided me throughout this entire project.
Okay, thanks. So Peter, on this one, do you want to moderate the questions?
Absolutely, yes. I'm afraid Kea Rutherford was unable to participate in the live Q&A session.
Okay.
But I mentored her in this in her research, and so I'm fairly familiar with what she did, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have intelligently.
Okay. Okay, we have the first question. Looks like from Kenichi Ueda. Can phytoliths be directly dated? Is carbon dating an option if they're mostly silica? And if so, were they dated in this study?
Regrettably, there isn't the possibility of carbon dating or dating phytoliths currently. I mean, unless you can find phytoliths in soils with strata, but that's unusual in California. But if you look in, for instance, in a bay core, for example, in San Francisco Bay or in the Monterey Bay or something like that, Santa Barbara Bay, you do have strata, and you can then approximately date phytoliths based on their occurrence in a particular stratum. But dating the actual phytoliths themselves is not possible. There is carbon occluded in phytoliths. Unfortunately, research has shown that chemical changes prevent dating that carbon that's occluded. So there are certainly research efforts to try and do that, because that would be a great advance if we could actually date phytoliths, but that's not possible currently. And that is in fact discussed, and that question is discussed in the paper if you would like to look at the paper.
And I think, and then an anonymous attendee is asking, are there plans for more phytolith-based studies in other park district areas?
Not that I'm personally aware of. There is a core group of phytolith researchers in California, one of whom unfortunately recently lost a lot of his research work in one of the fires. So it's not clear when he will be able to sort of come back online, as it were, to continue doing phytolith research. That, in fact, is Rand Evett, who is on this paper and was an important mentor to Kea as well, because he's probably, well, he's one of the technical experts in California on phytolith analysis, and in fact in the world. So I would anticipate phytolith analysis is a powerful method for determining actually a fairly large suite of answering a fairly large suite of questions. And so I imagine it will be used in the future. I just don't know of any particular plans at the current date. Thank you for your question.
Okay. Well, I think that's our last question. Oh, and there's now the question is now, can someone repost the paper citation? And so, yeah, I think we can post that in the chat at some point, and maybe we'll get a little more sophisticated and potentially post it as an answer to this question once we can get that. And then I think once we do post these live later on the website, we will include those two additional attachments. So we'll work on that.
Great.
Yeah. And Peter, I mean, if you could send that to Sunny in text, if she doesn't already have it, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. If there, I don't see any last questions, I think we can move on to the next talk.